You know the saying, quit while you're ahead? There have been a few brands that probably should have followed that advice. When Meza Audio released the Empyrean 2, I actually wondered if they'd started down a terrible path towards mediocrity, chasing the rest of the industry towards a Harman Target tuned quagmire of audio boredom. I wondered if they should have quit while they were ahead and stuck to the original Empyrean's tuning. Sure, not everybody liked it, but those that did, like me, loved it. Well, now there's the Poet headphone, and to all the team at Meza Audio, put your foot down and keep on going, because these are the most exciting headphone you've produced since the original Empyreans. Now that doesn't mean that they sound like the Empyreans, they definitely don't, but I'll explain the parallels in just a moment. Instead, I'd describe the tuning of the Poets as something in between the Elites and the Empyrean 2, but actually closer to the Empyrean 2. Somehow though, they're just better than the Empyrean 2, in my opinion. But first, before we get ahead of ourselves, you need to know what we're dealing with here. The Poets are a $2,000 open back planar magnetic headphone, and they're built with much of the same technology as the Elites and the Empyreans. That technology has been shrunk a little bit into a smaller cup size, and I think they've made another gorgeous looking headphone. The headband is a little bit simpler, with no carbon fibre in sight, but it's no less comfortable as a result. You can kind of think of the design of the Poet headphone as a blend between the 109 Pro and the Meza Empyrean 2 or the Elite, with probably a little bit more of a lean towards the Elite and the Empyrean. It uses the same magnetic earpad design and the same shape even, just in a smaller size. It also has the same dual trace planar magnetic design, using a switchback trace up the top and a circular trace down the bottom, because each is more efficient at different frequencies. And so the idea of it is that the top part of the diaphragm is more effective at bass frequencies, and then the bit that's focused into the ear canal with the spiral trace is better at the high frequencies. And I think that design's proven effective in the past because other Meza headphones sound fantastic using that system. The final design cue that we should mention is that the Poets have moved away from the mini XLRs used on the Empyrean 2 and the Elites, and instead they're using the 3.5mm connectors just like you'd find on the 109 Pros, the Lyric and Lyric 2, etc. And I don't see that as anything but a positive. It makes them more compatible with cables that you might already have for other brands. And I'm not familiar with any particular benefit of using mini XLRs. I just know that they're harder to connect and disconnect when you need to. Now, taking a sidestep for a moment, I don't know why Meza Audio felt the need to make these a more compact headphone. They're still open back, so they're not going to be portable, or they're not going to be used in portable situations, but I also have no issues with them being smaller, and I'm glad they made them because they sound fantastic. That sound quality is no doubt partly due to the driver, which we've already spoken about, which is designed and manufactured by Renaro Isodynamics. It's also partly due to the careful tuning done by Meza Audio's engineers, but it might only be possible thanks to the use of the AMTS technology that's been licensed from Dan Clark Audio. This is the same technology that allows the DCA Stealth, the DCA Expanse, and the DCA E3 to perform as they do, and I deeply respect each of those headphones and what they're able to achieve. But my heart resonates more with what Meza Audio's engineers have done with it in terms of the overall tuning and the overall result. The moment you listen to the Poets for the first time, there are two things that I think will probably strike you. Actually, probably only one thing will strike you, because the other thing is about something that you won't notice. The thing that you will notice is the incredible sense of separation and image placement in the Poet's perfectly sized and shaped soundstage. Each sound is given space to breathe and to be heard, but within a very coherent larger space. And what you won't notice is anything that sounds off, unnatural, or wrong. The tonal balance and the graduation of the different frequencies and the tuning of those frequencies in the Poet is just phenomenal. Before we get ahead of ourselves, I didn't just say that these are the best headphone on the planet. What I said is that their tuning and the graduation of frequencies across them is wonderfully balanced, some of the best that I've heard. If I were to level some criticism at some of the Meze Audio headphones that I love, like the Lyric 2 and the Meze Elites, the criticism would be that they do have some artificial enhancement in the upper registers of the treble. It brings a lovely sense of air and high frequency texture to their sounds, but it also sometimes distracts from the music when things don't sound as natural as they should. They sometimes remind you that you're listening to a headphone. The Poets don't do that. Ever. When you listen to these, they just disappear and leave you with musical enjoyment. So much so that I started wondering just how good these might be for a $2,000 headphone. So I went on a journey. Care to join me? The first stop was the in-house flagship Meze Elites. The Elites delivered a greater sense of resolution than the Poets, and that could be because of that extra sense of treble enhancement that the Elites have, but they could also be a more technically capable driver. The breadth of the vocalist and the upper registers, the harmonics perhaps of the snare hits, were a little bit more enhanced by the Elites, and it made it very interesting and exciting, but also sometimes a touch distracting. I know that some people find previous Meze Audio headphones like the Empyreans and the Elites to be a little bit fatiguing. There are certain treble sensitivities that they stir up in some people despite not being bright headphones. I don't think the Poets are going to have that issue. They're a more relaxed listen, and they allow the music to create the excitement rather than their tuning. In that respect, they remind me a lot of the original Empyreans, as I said at the beginning of this video. They're just about fun and enjoyment, but not at the expense of accuracy and musical technicalities. The Poets don't have the bass emphasis that the Empyreans had, the original ones, and so those who found the original Empyreans to sound too thick won't have that problem with the Poets. Where the Poets are amazing is their sense of separation of sounds, the focus of the imaging, and just their general musicality. Their soundstage isn't huge, but it always feels spacious. They deliver excellent weight and impact in the bass without feeling boosted or enhanced in any way. The sound is articulate and has a great sense of feel across all frequencies. Sure, in moments like the trumpet solo in Forever Young, the Elites will create a slightly sharper image focus and have you feeling like there's a little tiny trumpeter standing inside your head or just outside your head. But the Poets don't fall very far behind, and they never have that slightly unnatural sense of tonality that the Elites do occasionally have. Now, would I choose the Elite over the Poets? Yes, I still would, but they're twice the price as well. And so, what about comparing the Poets to the rest of their peers? After all, the Elites cost twice the price, and they should sound better. They should be more technically capable. At around about the $2,000 price tag of the Poets, you can buy other amazing headphones like the Headphone 2 from Head, the HiFiMAN HE1000 SE, the HiFiMAN HE1000 Unveiled if you're willing to spend a bit more, or the ZMF Atrium. These are all very strong competition, so it was extremely hard to choose which one of these or ones of these I'd compare to the Poet, so I chose all of them. The Headphone 2 GT is a very different sounding headphone compared to the Poet. It's a much crisper and leaner sounding headphone thanks to its Pro Studio heritage. The Headphone 2 is probably technically made for audiophiles, but its heart is that of a mixing and mastering headphone. As a result, vocals sound a bit cleaner and more textured from the Headphone 2 GT. The bass guitar also has a little bit less feel and impact. The Headphone 2 GT is a more insightful and transparent sounding headphone than the Poet, but it comes at a cost. It's clearly also a less engaging and emotive headphone. The Poet produces a bit more ambience and it fills out the bass more, which to me produces a more balanced listening experience overall. There's no doubt that both headphones are excellent here. The Poet is the enjoyment headphone, the Headphone 2 GT is the transparency and insight king. That might make it sound like the Poet is not insightful, but it is. The GT is just 99% insight at the price, whilst the Poet is maybe 85% insight at the price. For the record, the non-GT version of the Headphone 2 is what I would consider to give you 100% of insight at this price point. So what about the HiFiMAN offerings? The HiFiMAN HE1000 SE is a cheaper headphone these days than the Poet, and it offers a very different sound. The staging is the most immediate difference that I noticed. The HE1000 SE places the image of the sound higher inside the head and offers less overall width compared to the Poet. What's also impossible to miss is the sense of image focus from the HE1000 SE. That's possibly due to the extra treble it delivers when compared to the Poet, and is also why the HE1000 SE can sometimes come across just a little bit aggressive and a little bit bright in the treble. After spending a bit of time with both, I was ready to tell you that the HE1000 SE is the more technically capable headphone, but then I switched back to the Poet. The Poet revealed way more details through the mid-range than I could hear on the HE1000 SE. The SE is all about details in the treble and the upper mid-range, whereas the Poet gives you details in the mid-range and the lower mid-range that you might never have noticed before. Both are exceptional. To me, the way to summarize is that the HE1000 SE sounds more technically impressive at first, but the Poet is more natural and cohesive sounding. Over time, that can make the Poet more consistently enjoyable and the HE1000 SE more fatiguing. But we're also all different, so it's not to say one's better or worse, and it depends on your tastes and your sensitivities, so I'll need to leave the rest up to you. The key takeaway is there's no wrong choice here. And speaking of choices, you might be considering spending a little bit more money and getting the new HE1000 Unveiled. The Unveiled is an iteration of the HE1000 SE essentially, and so as you'd expect, they're generally very similar in their presentation, but the Unveiled version is more refined in its delivery. And so, again, generally speaking, everything I've just said about the HE1000 SE compared to the Poet is true for the HE1000 Unveiled against the Poet. And so what that means is that if you were leaning towards what I've just said about the HE1000 SE as being preferable to you, then you'd think the same thing about the HE1000 Unveiled. And therefore, if you want to know more about the HE1000 Unveiled and how different it is and in what ways it's different from the HE1000 SE, make sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell, because the review of the Unveiled is coming very soon. And that's where I'll be able to break down in much more detail the specific differences between the SE and the Unveiled, and I'll probably revisit the Poet again as well. For now though, we need to see how the $2,000 Poet compares to my all-time favourite pure enjoyment headphone in the $2,500 ZMF Atrium. Despite using two different driver types, these headphones have the most similar sound out of the comparisons I've done in this video. The dynamic driver Atriums are a little bit brighter in the upper registers, and you hear that on sounds like the horn lines in Another Spring, and it sounds great. They have a lovely sense of texture and air to the sound of the horns, that being the Atriums. On the other hand, the Poets are a little bit more coherent the way they tie all the different sounds together, like having that horn section sound more cohesive with the rest of the orchestra. Once again, both headphones are excellent in their own way. The Atriums also take off on a nice tube amp like a shit Folkvanger, and so synergy is definitely a thing here, as it is with any of these headphones. If you find just the right headphone amp pairing for headphone A, it's probably going to sound better than if you put headphone B with a lesser pairing. If you get both headphones paired with their ideal headphone amps, both are going to excel in their own ways. One area that the Atriums are particularly strong is their sense of articulation of notes. The crispness of the ringing of the chimes in Another Spring is a good example here. That said, the Poets are only a tiny touch behind on that same sense of articulation. Combine the fact that they're only a hair behind the Atriums on articulation, but the fact that they're ahead on the overall tonal balance, and again, it's a really tough call between those two headphones. I think the Atrium can be pure magic with the right headphone amp pairing, like the Folkvanger I mentioned before, but I think the Poets can be 99% magic with just about anything. And so whilst they might not quite reach the absolute heights that the Atriums can on the right setup, I think the Poets are going to get 95 to 99% of the way there with pretty much anything you plug them into. And so I think Meze Audio have just produced my favourite ever Meze headphone, probably since the original Empyreans. That honour lived with the 109 Pros until now, but I think the Poets have just gone one better. And if you're in the position where you've got the 109 Pro and you're thinking about these as an upgrade, I do think that the Poets are an upgrade from the 109 Pro. They're a slightly different sound, but I would definitely choose the Poets over the 109s if you put both in front of me. And so I've put links in the description where you can go and check out the Poet for yourself. But if you're not quite ready to spend that much on a pair of headphones, then check out my review of the 109 Pros here next, because they share most of the same levels of enjoyment, engagement and fun from the music that the Poets do, and they cost less than half the price. So watch that one next, but for now, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.